All right, guys, we gotta talk about Suicide Silence. No, not the album, not the tee-hee-hee, not that thing with the underage girl that's just come up. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, which is what he should have said. I'm not gonna talk about their gear. I'm not gonna talk about their quality of their music. I'm not gonna talk about their personalities. I know there's kind of a lot to keep track of since they managed to be in the headlines kind of a lot for a band that's really not that big. The thing that I want to talk about is this most recent thing in the last couple days that's just come out, and that is that Suicide Silence has offered their fans the opportunity to pay the band to work as their roadie for a day for $150. I feel so many things about this. First of all, people seem to be kind of freaking out about it. At least in my feed, I'm seeing a lot of people complaining that what they're doing is taking advantage of their fans and that the whole thing is very stupid. Now, most of the people in my feed are musicians, so you gotta keep that in mind. And I don't think many of them are big Suicide Silence fans. I don't really have any strong feelings about their music one way or the other, so keep that in mind. The real issue at hand here is perceived value. This is a very, very important concept, especially for us as artists. It doesn't matter if you're a musician, or a painter, or a sculptor, or a slam poet. You have to be aware of the concept of perceived value and actual value and figuring out what you are actually worth as an artist. Not just as an artist, but also as a personality. And here's why that's important. The fans who are gonna be paying this money aren't paying for the art of Suicide Silence, okay? That's the thing that happens on stage after they're all set up and it's time to play the show. What they're looking for is the experience with the personalities of Suicide Silence. And that's what Suicide Silence is selling. Both people who are very excited about spending money to be their roadie for a day and people who think that the band is ripping off their fans and taking advantage of them are talking about the same concept. Any fan who would spend $150 to go and work for their favorite band for a day obviously thinks that it's worth $150. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend that money. Anyone who thinks that $150 is way too high of a price to pay to go and do manual labor might also be right. The difference between these 2 points of view is that one person thinks that the value of that experience is very high, and the other person thinks it's very low. The actual value of the experience is going to be how much someone is actually willing to pay to go and be their roadie for a day. So now the band has set the price of this experience at $150 a head. The short version is that if somebody's willing to pay it, then it is actually worth that much. It might not be worth that much to you, and it's definitely not worth that much to me. But if it's worth $150 to some kid and Suicide Silence is their favorite band, then it is actually worth that much. That would mean that Suicide Silence has in fact set the price at its actual value. I'm gonna use a different band as an example. And the reason I'm gonna do this is because I think Suicide Silence is kind of too controversial of a band for us to be looking at this objectively. Part of the reason is this. As metalheads, we drastically undervalue ourselves, both as artists and as fans. Bands and musicians, especially in the metal genre, think that money is worth a lot more than it really is. Most metal musicians I know severely undervalue themselves as artists. For some reason in metal, we feel like we're worth a whole lot less than we actually are. And this leads to us actually getting paid less to do the things that we know we're good at. And it also leads to the outside world viewing us as being less valuable than we actually are. So maybe you don't want to go be a roadie for Suicide Silence for a day for that kind of money. But what if it was Metallica? Or what if it was a band like the Rolling Stones where people pay $300 plus a ticket just to go see them play? I imagine that you might jump at the chance to go be a roadie for the Rolling Stones for one day for $150. I don't think that you'd say that $150 to go carry Metallica's cabs and then hang out with the band during sound check would be too much. And of course, that's because Metallica is the biggest metal band in the world, no question. I mean, think about it. How much money would you pay to let Keith Richards boss you around for a day? Oi! Mate, stick it over there, yeah? Right in the corner. No, it's not that, is it? No, mate, it goes over on that side of the stage, right next to the guitar. You know the one. It's the telly. That's the one what's mine. Don't trip over the cables. Oh, what's he doing? He's dropped the cabinet. Am I supposed to work under these conditions? Or think about it, being a roadie for Metallica for a day, I would gladly pay $150 to do that. James, is this where you want it? Yeah! All right. You want me to put this over here, James? Mr. Hetfield, is this where this goes? Yeah! Oh yeah! Don't even try and tell me that you wouldn't do that shit. Now, of course, Metallica and the Rolling Stones do not need unpaid labor. They can afford to pay their roadies probably a lot more than $150 a day. And I bet the roadies are more than just teenage fans of the band. Now, however large or successful of a band you perceive Suicide Silence to be, I'm pretty sure that they're a great deal less big of a deal than you think that they are. They probably do all right, but that doesn't mean that an extra $150 a day from the 7 people at each show that they're going to take on to do this, that's going to go a long way for them. Now, you and I might think of Metallica or the Rolling Stones as being a band that is worth the amount of money. You and I might think, of course we would pay that kind of money to go and do this with Metallica. I would love to meet Metallica. You'd probably easily pay that much just for a regular meet and greet. And although this would probably be a lot more work, if you've never had to carry a guitar cab before or a drum set into a show, then you might actually think it's kind of fun. What you have to consider is that anyone who's willing to pay that money, Suicide Silence to them is like Metallica or the Rolling Stones. So even if you think they suck or they're not that big of a deal, it's not about whether or not you think they're a big deal. It's the kid who's paying the money who has to think that they're a big deal or not. Even if what you think they're doing is tantamount to exploiting their fans, you have to admit that it's kind of a genius way to make some extra money for a band who's probably not making that much. For 5 dudes in a metal band to make enough money to make a living is incredibly difficult. And when I see metal fans disparaging bands for being creative and coming up with new ways to make money, all I can see is the eventual end of our genre entirely. Even 20 years ago, when the music industry was nuts and you could actually make a living as a band, metal bands were still struggling. Now in 2017, the money has dried up far more than that, and so bands really can't make a living off of just touring and selling albums and selling merch. If you can come up with a better way for these people to make money, I'm all ears. The reality of the situation is that this idea of them actually being a roadie for a day is probably not going to pan out the way that you think it is. They're probably going to give these kids like a couple toms to haul in, and then they're going to tell them to get the fuck out of the way and let the professionals do the job. It's not like these fans who are paying for this experience are going to get the real roadie experience. They're not going on tour for 2 months and sleep in the back of a van and eat the crappy catering every day. Probably more like an honorary roadie kind of a thing where they'll take a couple pictures, they'll get to hang out with the band a little bit. So what the post from Suicide Silence actually says is that you will work alongside the crew during load-in. I mean, how much are they really going to let these kids carry? If one of them pulls something, carrying something, they're screwed. You'll stand side stage for Suicide Silence's set. Enjoy a pre-show meal with the crew. Okay, so dinner is included. Mingle with the band during sound check. How the hell does that work? Mingle with them during sound check? Does that mean you're going to stand on stage while they're checking out their instruments? Like 7 kids wandering around the stage while they're actually playing a song? Like, what does that mean? Exclusive Suey Crew t-shirts. That sounds more like a burden than anything else. You're gonna wear a shirt that says Suey Crew? That's not that cool. Working crew laminate. Now that's kind of cool. Laminate is like your backstage pass, all access pass probably. So you could probably go anywhere in the whole venue with it. I don't know if it's gonna be an actual usable backstage pass. That seems a little dangerous to have 7 random fans running around with these passes. All right, let's take a look at the numbers real quick. $150 a person times 7 people. That's $1,050 per show. There are 21 shows on the tour. So the band stands to make $22,000 off of this. So that probably seems like a lot of money, but in reality, they might come back from the tour still in debt or only breaking even, because that's the reality for metal bands these days. Or it might be the only profit that they actually make during the tour. Being in a touring band these days is incredibly difficult and really expensive. Whether or not you're gonna do it so that you can be a roadie for them for a day or to buy their box set or whatever, you wanna be doing it now rather than when they're on their final tour because they're breaking up because they can't afford to be musicians anymore. It's possible that no one's going to do this and the whole thing is going to fall flat on its face and then they're going to look really fucking stupid. But it's perfectly possible that they will fill every single slot and make that $22,050 of which I spoke earlier. Who knows? They might even use it to pay their real roadies. Really what I think the fans are paying for is for the band to put up with them for 6 or 7 hours while they do this whole charade of pretending like they're actually helping. Because I don't know, maybe they'll help, but really, it's more likely that they're just going to be in everybody's way. If you've ever loaded a band onto a stage, then you've experienced the bottlenecking that occurs. This back and forth, like trying to squeeze in with a big old cab or a kick drum or whatever. If there's more than like 4 or 5 people going around, it's just a nightmare. So now imagine the whole band, the actual crew, and then 7 random people who have no experience doing this. In reality, it's probably just gonna make it a nightmare for everybody, but the kids are gonna have a good time. It's likely that the band is going to make enough money to be able to do another tour and maybe make another album, who knows? So it very well might be worth it. Even if the band is splitting it among themselves just to have some pocket cash, that's $4,000 a piece. At the rate at which Suicide Silence goes through guitars, that's probably not going to last very long. In 2017, just being a musician is not enough to pay the bills. So bands are resorting to selling experiences to their fans. This is kind of an extreme example of that. Something else to consider is that if the band was doing all right, then why would they bother doing something like this? It could be that they're not doing that well, they're not making enough money, so they have to do something like this to survive. I see a ton of metalheads complaining about EDM fans who are willing to pay $150, $200, $300 to go see their favorite DJs hit play on their laptop. But what they're missing out on is the fact that the fans are willing to pay $300 to go see their favorite artists. It doesn't matter if they suck. Of course they suck. They're willing to pay that money to go have the experience of going to see their favorite band. Fans of metal music are not willing to do that. And that's why these bands have to do stupid shit like this. Even the biggest bands in metal don't get that kind of money for tickets. What does that say about our genre? What does it say about the fans and how they value the bands? And the amount of money that we're willing to pay to go and be part of these experiences or to go see these bands demonstrates how much we value their art. And honestly, if we're not willing to spend that kind of money, then where do we think that metal is going to be in 10 or 20 years? I think pretty much all of the bands that we care about will stop caring about us if we're not willing to pay that kind of money. That's just the fact of the matter. That's it. That's all there is to it. So in conclusion, this very well may be just a real stupid PR stunt and a terrible move on the part of the band. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't really take a good, long, hard look at what we're willing to pay metal bands to do their job, then it's very possible that in 10 or 20 years, there's not going to be any metal bands left. So before you seriously criticize Suicide Silence really hard, you might want to think about what you would do if you were in a band like that and you just weren't making enough money to survive. It'll be very interesting to see how it pans out. I want to know what you guys think. Is this a brilliant business strategy on the part of the band, or is it just them exploiting their fans who they clearly don't care about at all? All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button for more reviews and original content, and I'll see you real soon.